And as you'll see, the title of the talk is The Christian Vision and Dignity of Work, which is something you guys may know more about than I do. I've tied this to the Stephen Covey principle, the desires of men to leave a legacy, because I think as men, so often, how do we want to leave a mark in history, right? A big part of it is going to be through what we do, through what we kind of accomplish and leave behind. Did I leave the world in hopefully a better place? And it's interesting because the reality is the majority of our lives is probably spent in one form of work or other, right? You wake up and you go to work, and let's pretend you are doing the regular 40 hours a week. That's a significant chunk of your time. And then whatever your commute is should probably be factored in, because the reality is you wouldn't be commuting there unless it was in order to work. So that's factored in. And then even when you come home, there's still work. You got a yard, you've got dishes, your wife does X amount of it, but there's still going to be something waiting for you. There's probably a cabinet that needs to be fixed, and she will remind you of it regularly until it is fixed. If you go back to the original creation narrative, it's interesting because I think we get into our minds that work is a sad consequence of original sin. And the reality is that's not true. Work with toil is a sad consequence of original sin. But just work actually was an original blessing of God the Creator to Adam and Eve, and that has not ceased to be the case. So I think we need to baptize, in a sense, our perspective of work and put it in its right place. On the one hand, it is not the end-all, be-all. It is not where I'm going to find my ultimate identity. My only goal in life is not going to be to make money, to make an impact, to have a statue of myself built somewhere, or to have a university named after me or whatever. If those things happen, wonderful. But on the other hand, it's not, just some curse and drudgery. Why couldn't God have just made it so I could just goof off on the beach all day? Frankly, if that was your life, you would hate it before long anyway. Work ennobles us, and work gives us the grace and the capacity to participate in God's creative action. I've given you some quotes from Laborem Exercens, which was an encyclical written by John Paul II on work. I just grabbed a few quotes that I thought were kind of cool. John Paul II, maybe some of the stuff that we're reading now feels like it's commonplace. The whole idea that when we work, we are participating in God's creative action and we are furthering it. Well, he was kind of, to my knowledge at least, he was kind of the Pope that made that a cool thing to say. Just like John Paul II was the one who created the theology of the body. Yeah, obviously did with a certain theology of sexuality and whatnot, of course, because it's a major part of being human. But John Paul II enriched the whole theology of the body to such a degree. I mean, he's said things that now are just commonplace. It's all the cool Catholic groups out there in the church are teaching it, especially with young adults. There's all these TLB workshops and stuff. Well, where did it come from? It came from the Pope. He was also considered to be the workers' Pope. The other popes, some of them came from working backgrounds and some didn't. But I mean, John Paul II grew up in World War II in Poland, and a country that was occupied, and he was forced to work in a chemical plant, and I think for a little while he was in some mining, but he was exposed regularly to physical labor. Granted, he kind of got a little bit of slack because a lot of his fellow workers, knowing that he was a seminarian and he was training to be a priest, they would kind of shield him and do some of his work for him so that he could study and go ahead and serve them. But he knew what it meant. He witnessed it and he experienced it with his own hands and his own back and his own body, what it meant to go out and to sweat and to labor. But he's also, being the great intellectual he was, he still lives today, so I guess is. he was also a genius. He was a thinker, and he was a university teacher later on in life. And he also understood that not all work is physical labor, that intellectual work and labor are just as more dignified, they're just as much a part of being a worker. And probably everyone I'm looking at to one extent or another. I don't know if there are any physical laborers in the room, but all of us, I think, to one degree or another, are more kind of in the intellectual realm. It doesn't mean you're teachers or researchers, but I mean, if you're an investor, I mean, it's a thinking man's job. If you're a doctor, it's not, yeah, you got to hold the needle, but for the most part, it's your brain. It's you analyzing. It's not a whole lot of physical labor involved. Maybe a chiropractor, who knows? But for the most part, there's not a lot of, you're not breaking a physical sweat for the most part as a doctor. Maybe the people under your knife are, but that's another conversation. Interestingly enough, John Paul II says something that seems obvious, but it's a profound thought. He said, work is one of the characteristics that distinguish man from the rest of creatures whose activity for sustaining their lives cannot be called work. Interesting. You think about beavers, they make houses and stuff, and nonetheless it's not work. It's just them following their instinct. Bees make beehives and honey and all that. Only man is capable of work, and only man works, and at the same time by work occupying his existence on earth. So what's the difference between a bee or a beaver and us? Well, again, it is the participation in God's creative work. God gives us the dignity. We're made in his image and likeness. We have been made into children of God. And therefore, he gives us the capacity to be co-creators with him. Now, he obviously, in an absolute sense, is the only real creator. But God is glorified when we create, when we utilize what he has given us and we create and we perfect nature. You think about your kids. If you love your children, you're not threatened by the fact that you watch your kids grow up and they start to get really good at something. And hopefully, if you truly love your children, you're happy when they are better at something than you are. Imagine, I don't know, maybe Michelangelo's dad was a sculptor too. But would he, if he's a good father, would he have been upset? This kid thinks he's so good. Here he is making all these masterpieces and I'm just some bum. I'm making columns that are going into a church. I'm just doing the facade or whatever. Michelangelo's making the Pietà. I mean, a good father would be proud of his son. You're glorified. And you receive, when there's true love, love seeks the well-being of the beloved. That's kind of one of the definitions of love, is to seek the well-being of the person, the object of your love, the person that you love. So if there is authentic love, the greater your child it becomes, the prouder you are as a parent, okay? Well, how much more is that the case with God? Only he can create out of nothing. Creation ex nihilo. Only God can truly create in the radical sense of the term, but he gives us the capacity to work with his creation and to develop it, and to perfect it and to beautify it. And we were talking last night before the great silence descended upon us. We were talking about Central Florida. And I was saying, can you even build there? The whole center part, isn't it just like one big swamp? Well, the reality is they have. They drain the swamps and they do whatever they do. And now you've got nice neighborhoods and you've got Ave Maria University there where there used to just be crocodiles and pumas. Okay, well, they did it. And when we do things well, we can perfect and beautify creation. There's probably, you've seen, especially if all those tropical countries where, if you just leave things to grow wild, there's vines and things competing with each other. And if you come and you make it harmonious and you can bring forth, you terrace the landscape and you put in fountains and plant the right things, and these paradises become even more beautiful than what their natural state would be. Okay, that's God giving us the capacity to beautify and to perfect what he has made. Probably the most obvious example, again, going back to sculptors. take some boulder out there in the yard. Okay, there's a certain beauty to it. It fits into its nature and whatnot. But you get a guy like Michelangelo working on it, and he brings forth beauty out of that there certainly wasn't before. There's no doubt that human work has an ethical value of its own, which clearly and directly remain linked to the fact that the one who carries it out is a person, a conscious and free subject, that is to say, a subject that decides about himself. And that's what makes our work have spiritual value in the end of the day. That's what differentiates us from honeybees and beavers. We are people, we are persons, they aren't. And therefore we can choose to love in our work and glorify God. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is how do we then humanize and spiritualize our work? This is not going to be anything earth-shattering. It's probably stuff you already know, but perhaps the reminder will be good. In all of this, I think let's keep in mind the Holy Family. If you want, kind of as a backdrop, so we don't get lost in ideas, just to try to imagine. Interestingly enough, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, all three of them, again, at least up until Jesus' public life, but all three of them, the majority of their day from sun up until sundown was working. You even think about the Blessed Mother. Immaculately conceived, nobody has had a more profound prayer life than the Blessed Mother. Fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum, all that good stuff. The reality is, small town Israel, she would have waken up probably with the sun, had to go out, grab the jar, fill the water in the morning. Simple things like doing laundry, especially they didn't even have soap back then, but simple things like doing laundry were a chore. Making clothes, again, there's no yarn tree out there. You had to do whatever. I don't even know how you make yarn. Well, usually you're thinking like wool or something. But think of the process just to make yarn. There's a sheep, and you shear the sheep, and whatever you do, and you twine it, and somehow you make it into this long stringy thing where it's all stuck together. And then you dye it, and then it's this size, and then you got to stick it in a loom. Somebody's got to make the loom, and then and the process just to make the clothes that they wore. There was serious labor involved in that. Making a fire. Have you been to again, only one of you I think has actually been to the Holy Land, right? Only you. Especially in the times of Jesus. Now we've got irrigation and stuff. There's not a lot of wood. So, this is a crude biological fact, but the fuel that they generally used for fire was not wood. Maybe they start when they could get it, but they basically took manure, bricks, and then with salt, there's a whole talk I can give you. The talk on Jesus when he talks about salt, if it loses its taste, what is it good for? Actually, sometimes you'll see the word, if it loses its virtue, what is it good for? I suspect the word virtue is the actual original translation, because salt, it was not only good for eating, but it actually becomes a fire starter. There's something about it when it's mixed with manure and whatever that it becomes an igniter. It lights up easily, and they could use these bricks to do their cooking of all things. And other heat the house and do the other things. But all of these things were a chore. Did they have moments specifically and exclusively reserved to prayer? Sure. Probably long periods. I'm sure that the Blessed Mother as a girl just naturally when she was walking and would go out into the countryside when she had a break. And we know Jesus would do that regularly. He would just go out at night when other people are sleeping and just be with his Father and sometimes spend the entire night. Or they would all wake up and they'd say, hey, where's Jesus? He was here last night. I went to bed, he was there. And then you'd find him out in the countryside somewhere praying because he just felt this existential need. So I'm sure there were those long moments, and we need those. But the reality is the vast majority of their day, they were laboring. Now, again, we know it up here, but I think the common misconception is I've got my church bucket, my church silo, God's silo, and then my work silo, and then my family silo, and then my I get to do it or I want to relax silo. Whether or not it may be sinful, that's another question. The reality is God, when he made us, there was only one silo. Okay? All of it was the God silo. There might be different it's kind of like a rainbow. There's a spectrum. It's all one rainbow. There's a spectrum. There's kind of the work, and then there's the family, and then it all blends together, but it's all one big continuum, right? And I'm sure Jesus and Joseph, how they made their work into an ongoing prayer, and the Blessed Virgin Mary too. And all of us can. So first of all, how do you make your work into a prayer, and how do you make your work into a means of sanctification? First of all, it does need to be honest work. Okay? First and foremost. You can be digging potatoes, you can be digging a ditch, you can be doing whatever, you can be cleaning the stables, whatever. It doesn't have to be noble or exotic work. You can also be studying, doing research, you can be investing people's funds, you can be doing all that. It needs to be honest work. A series during COVID, I got bit by the Breaking Bad bug. And it's kind of like, what else do you do? You've got brain fog. You try to read, no, it's not working. You try to, I said my prayers, but again, the brain fog and everything. So what do you do when you're locked up, especially in the early COVID years when we were like quarantined, you can't do anything? Well, you do something like binge on Breaking Bad and watch, you got 10, 14 days, whatever, so you go through that thing. Interesting series, well written. I quite enjoyed it. But, if you don't know what it is, it was about this high school genius guy, but a high school chemistry teacher, and he's got cancer, and his son's got whatever problem, disability, and life is just going down the drains. And then he realizes, hey, I can make a lot of money cooking meth. And it's the whole series of him. You watch this moral decay. He starts out as this bumbling kind of high school teacher, but I guess I can make some money here. And he's got his high school flunky, who had been one of his students before. And you watch him just get darker and darker and darker as the series goes on. I think it lasted five seasons, I think. At the end, he becomes like this kingpin because his product was way better than anybody else's. But he's gotten to such a dark place. And you'd see him as constantly throughout the series, there's these moments where he has to make these decisions. Every time he thinks he gets ahead, there's always some negative consequence. Somebody's going to come and try to kill him, and then you got to do something, and you go into a darker place yet. So it's this continual spiral, and they do a really good job in that regard, painting that, yeah, you might think you have short-term gains, but when you are doing the wrong thing, it always keeps pulling you down further and further. And he ends up dying in the end. Finally, they have to wrap up the series, so basically all the main characters die one way or another. And that's the end of the story. And they're not trying to glamorize that business. Actually, the origin of it apparently was that one of the actors was reading the story. I guess they were like some Mormon missionaries, and they seemingly were doing great stuff, and then they find out they're these meth dealers. And, I think like one of their family members got sucked into that whole thing, and they're realizing this thing is a plague. And then that kind of led to this, this speculating, how do you get into that world? And then they came up with this character and the whole 9 yards. So the work has to be honest. You're not going to glorify God being a prostitute or a drug dealer or a meth kingpin or mafia don or whatever, That's obvious. The reality is, though, the vast majority of our work is honest. Society, dishonest work always is a parasite. So you can work at a McDonald's, you can work as a garbage man, whatever. It's all honest work. You're serving society. The second thing is to do your work. Well, secondly, I would say offer it up then. At the beginning before you leave or when you're starting your work, it's a good practice just to kind of stop, it can be 30-second pause or whatever, just stop. What am I about to do, Lord? Today I know I'm going to offer up my work and I give it to you and have an apostolic intention if you want. For Aunt Bathilda's cancer or for my children and for their faith, whatever your particular intention is. The brothers here, every time we do anything, it's the Come Holy Spirit. Okay, I don't know how many times a day they study, But every time they study, every time they start a class, they say those prayers. They're offering it up. Every time they go to their desk and they study, they say those prayers. And at the end, we give you thanks, Almighty God, for all your benefits, you who live and reign forever and ever. Amen. And it's a habitual thing, but it's the habitual, you start an activity, you begin by putting it in prayer, you ask God to bless your work, and you offer it up to God for Him. And now, you don't need to, and you can't, frankly, especially if it's intellectual work, you can't be consciously focusing on God all the time. If you're carrying loads of bricks, you're probably focusing on just trying to get up the stairs. And if you're thinking heavily about something, you can't simultaneously be thinking about God, right? But in the back of your mind, if there is that apostolic intention, what happens is your honest work, well done, becomes a form of prayer. It doesn't substitute the fact that you need your morning meditation and all the other things that we do as RC members, but it becomes a form of prayer, and it's your way of glorifying God through the day. That's what Jesus, Mary, and Joseph would have done. And that leads to the next thing, which is to try to do your work with perfection. Now, again, I would say rather than perfection, I would say purity of intention or love. Okay? What is the most loving way I can work? Well, it is, generally speaking, to really try to do my job well. However, there's the danger of perfectionism, right? That starts becoming a selfish thing. This work isn't good enough for me to put my name on it, and it starts becoming about you. And when you find yourself freaking out, rule of thumb, if you're freaking out about anything, it's a sign there's something wrong. The Holy Spirit, freaking out is not a fruit of the Holy Spirit, okay? The fruits of the Holy Spirit are love, joy, peace, equanimity, all that. Freaking out, I have yet to see a list where that one enters. So it's always a sign that the devil's finger is in there somewhere. And we can, because if we're men and we take pride in our work, that honest pride can start to get tinges of a dishonest pride, and it starts becoming about us. We've all been there. In my early years of priesthood, I remember, sometimes when people would interfere with my apostolate, and you're like, my apostolate, not God's, mine. So it can be there. I'm listening to an audio book. It's a biography of Steve Jobs. I just finished by the same author, Isaacson, I think it is. He did the Steve Jobs one a long time ago. And he just finished the Elon Musk one, but I did that one first. Both of these are fascinating guys. Eccentric geniuses. I don't recommend you follow them as moral beacons. But they're men who, in their own ways, have profoundly marked the world, and in many regards made the world a better place. They produce good products. Elon Musk, it's incredible. He's got like 6 major things going on that each one of which would require a very highly talented guy. I mean, he's got the Neuralink thing going, trying to implant chips into your brain to be able to directly from your thought communicate with devices, and to a certain extent there's already success. He's actually got like monkeys that play video games just simply with their brains. So he's able to get, there's no hand control or anything, but they're able to, do simple things like that. So there's amazing stuff going on. He's got Tesla, he has SpaceX, he has Starlink, he's got X or Twitter or whatever, which he took over. That seems to be the one he has the hardest time with because it's not really his wheelhouse. He's got something else going on. Oh, well, he was involved in AI. He's trying to protect us from AI, and he was instrumental in the formation of OpenAI, and then kind of took on a life of its own, and now he's started another thing because he didn't like the way OpenAI is, because he fears what it could do or become. One of the things that characterizes both Jobs and Musk, though, is, and I would say to a not necessarily coming out of a theological place, but the perfectionism. Why did Jobs, because Apple was in such bad shape and they were so dysfunctional when they rehired Steve Jobs. And, they had like 15 or 20 different products going on. And he was like, he just says, reduce redundancy, cut it down. We're doing 4 things. And we're going to do 4 things and we're going to do them really well. And he was so, what's the word I want? I just engrossed in things. For example, the inside of the computer that nobody ever looks at has to be beautiful. Any other computer maker just finds a way to kind of stick things in there. But his father was a carpenter, or not his biological dad, but the dad who adopted him. His father was a carpenter, and his father at a young age taught him. And I'm sure Jesus and Joseph would have done this. The little details that nobody's going to see also matter. Do them well. Make them beautiful. Even the little cornice or something on the inside of some box or something. Why not make it beautiful? Why not do it well? Why not do it with perfection? Okay, well, Steve Jobs took that, and so you see, and I'm not an Apple guy, frankly, I'm more a Samsung, Microsoft guy because they're cheap. But there's something to be admired. Why did his things take off? A lot of it is because there's a harmony, there's a simplicity, there's a beauty, and they really took pride in trying to make the best thing they possibly could. What is the best marketable product? I have to make a profit, but the best marketable thing we can produce right now, and keep pushing the envelope and keep making it better and more functional and more attractive. And the other guys are just saying, how can we make as much money as possible? It's two different ways of doing things, right? And in the process, guys like Steve Jobs made money hand over fist because they were trying to just produce the best product. Tesla was the same thing. Elon Musk was completely, it's amazing he pulled it off, because that, and I forget what the others, I don't think SpaceX existed yet. Maybe it did. He had two major things going on, and both of them were really within a hair's width of just both tanking. He managed to pull it off. But part of the reason, he said the first Tesla, because it's going to be a unique thing, it has to be so awesome. This has to make a statement. We're not going to, and guys are saying, you can make it cheaper. And he went through all these redesigns and retooling, and I don't know how many times, and spending all kinds of extra money because he wanted to get the perfect product out there. He says, once people get in mind that a Tesla is going to be, this is the standard, then you can start making cheaper models and things for people that can't afford however much money the first Tesla cost, $80,000 or whatever it was. And these guys created something, and they took such pride in doing things well. And that produced products that became revolutionary and really changed each of their respective industries. So, take what's good from them. Don't take all the quirks. And by the way, these guys were horrible to work for, both of them. They were totally rude and mean and whatnot. So don't treat your employees the way that Elon Musk and Steve Jobs did and do. But there's something to be, I think, gleaned from that. And then I would say also, there's always the possibility of a good habit is to take little prayer breaks. Now, prayer break can last 5 seconds. It's just a stop and remind yourself, what am I doing? Who am I doing it for? Lord, you've got some decision to make. You don't know the answer. Lord, enlighten me right now so I can do the best thing for my client. Lord, right now, I've been getting distracted or whatever. I want to refocus. I'm going to give this to you. Just constantly throughout the day. That's a sign of a prayerful soul, is that the old monastic tradition, I don't remember what the word was, but they referred to them as javelins that we would throw, just quick little prayers. It's not like doing an hour-long meditation. It's just quick, constant succession of little darts being thrown, and these are your prayers constantly being offered up to God. And again, the more that we can form that habit, the more the prayer becomes something co-natural to us. We're going to talk more about your prayer with a big P later on, which is going to be, your acts of piety, what you find in your prayer book, your meditation, your mass, your confession, all that stuff. Don't think that you're ever going to turn your work into a prayer if you don't, first of all, have some habits of just prayer that is nothing else but, right, these 30 minutes, I'm dedicated to this, and this is the only thing I'm doing. If you don't have that, it's an illusion to think that your work is going to stay a prayer for very long. Sometimes I've heard foolishly people say, well, Father, I don't need to spend this much time because my work is a prayer. I frankly do not believe you. Whatever you think you know about your work, if you're not capable of stopping and giving time dedicated exclusively to God, your work isn't a prayer. I want to do a little parenthesis here on prayer. Prayer in the broad sense. You know how at the beginning of Lent you hear, what are the three great means of sanctification that we have during Lent? Prayer, big P, fasting, and almsgiving. Almsgiving. I'm a fundraiser, so we'll remember that at the end of the retreat. Almsgiving. Poor hungry brothers that consume thousands of calories a day playing sports and working, and each one of these brothers could probably knock down $500 worth of food in one sitting and not know they did it. No, in all honestness, I think, why is it that these things, for example, why would sacrifice or fasting in particular, why would that become a means of sanctification? Or why would almsgiving become a means of sanctification? Well, I think the way we should look at it is like this. Prayer, this is just me speaking, you'll never find this in the catechism. Prayer is love that takes the form of conversation with God. Okay? So when you are praying with a big P, it is you taking time out and entering into some form of conversation. Some people, their conversation seems to be a monologue of them, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine at the beginning. But gradually, it should increasingly be the form of conversation where we're listening. God is doing more of the talking, and we're just simply responsive. You may not think you're hearing anything, but the simple act of docility to God and to His will is already, you're growing. You're growing in holiness. Fasting, and if you want more broadly, sacrifice of any form, especially corporal sacrifice, is love which takes, well, if you're going to do fasting or physical sacrifice, I would say love kind of manifests itself through, if you want, the body, right? So when I'm fasting and I feel hungry, it's 11:30 and I know I've got 2 more hours before lunch, my stomach is rumbling. There's something in particular to fasting, by the way. This is getting into a whole parenthesis, but it's not just like any other sacrifice. It has power. Like in exorcisms, Jesus didn't say some demons need prayer and sacrifice. He said some demons need prayer and fasting to be able to get rid of them. So whenever we're offering up these sacrifices, it is kind of, I am loving through my body. Or if it's another sort of a sacrifice, if you want, you can just simply say, I'm loving through my choice, the choice of will, whatever the particular sacrifice is, dealing with annoying people, or the room is cold, or whatever it is. Almsgiving is I'm loving through the means that God gives me. If it's money or donated clothing, it could also be your time. Almsgiving also broadly would embrace acts of service and charity. But it would be loving through your means, right? And work, I would say, I'm going to love through my labor. So when work is understood in that context, that's how work becomes prayer. It is when I choose to love God and love my neighbor through the work that I do. And work in that light then, again, good, honest work, well done with perfection and purity of intention, you are serving society. And in serving society, what are you doing is you're creating out of this world a place that is wholesome and good to raise future generations, take care of the current generation and raise future generations of people who can know and love God. That's kind of God's plan for us in work. If you look at civilization today and look at, the cavemen, what do you think is a more apt setting to calmly, to raise children to be able to know and glorify God? For all that today's world has a lot of sins and temptations, there's a lot that has been humanized. We have comforts, we have abundance, we have all these things, and those are in and of themselves good. We don't always use them well, but we're not, we've evolved beyond just picking up a bone and fighting the next tribe.